Okay, we're back with the episode 3 of the Crimean War, which means that you get to watch me play catch up as I try to remember what happened in the last two. I know these were Crimean War things, and it was interesting because it's the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, which you don't think about too much in naval warfare. Um, and I like the Russian uniforms, I think. So let's see how much I can remember and how much I'm completely lost
The
here.
Crimea, September 14th, 1854. A Russian officer looks out on a sea of masts.
What's that? I like green and
400
orange.
British and French ships crowd the bay, reminding him of the Moscow skyline choked with cathedral spires. At night, they glittered like a city on the waves. And a city it is, at least in
Okay.
population.
Oh,
For
I just realized I apologize. I still have my big face on, don't I? Yeah. Sorry about that. Let's start over.
1854. A Russian officer looks
1854.
out on a sea of masts.
Got the
400
green and
British
orange
French
uniforms
ships
I
crowd
like.
the
That means nice work for the kind of artwork they do in Extra History. This is very
bay,
nice.
reminding
Good
him
color
of the
play.
Moscow skyline choked with cathedral spires.
You can see what they're
At
referring
night,
to
they
with the
glittered like a
skyline.
city on the waves. And a city it is, at least in population. For swarming ashore from the ships are 57,000 British, French, and Ottoman troops,
Yeah, it's quite a
all
few.
headed for the port of Sevastopol. But when the Russian scouts report back, their commander, Prince Menshikov,
And you know there's more still on the ships taking care of their ships, that whole career thing.
While the Russians may have
So it's only 57,000 who can rush off of them.
20,000 fewer men, they fortified the heights above the river, positioning
Yeah, I was gonna
100
say,
cannons
the
toward
defense
the
always has
landing
the
allies.
advantage.
He's made
Axis
an
and
uphill
Allies
killing
gets that
ground
right.
to welcome them, and one he believes can hold for 3 weeks. Soon, this obscure river will be famous worldwide. Its name transmitted over telegraph wires and spoken with
Okay, which river?
awe in a dozen languages. The Battle of the Alma.
Yeah, famous Alma. I know all about the Alma.
Thanks so much
It's
to
not
Trade
just an
Coffee
old
for
lady
helping to
name.
keep us history-loving beans caffeinated.
Mm-hmm.
Though the Allied landings looked impressive from a distance, most soldiers on the beach could see they were a disorganized mess. The British troops in
what I'd
particular
assume.
looked hunted and discouraged. See, most recruits had expected to ship right to the Crimea in order to take Sevastopol, but instead,
Okay.
they'd been dumped ashore at Varna to gather strength and wait for orders. The
Ah.
army waited there for 3 months, rotting amid a massive sea of tents.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
while thousands of British troops had marched out of home villages and cities singing upbeat songs like "Cheer, boys, cheer," they weren't singing much anymore. Actually, the final line of that ballad, "Farewell England, farewell forevermore," had now taken on a more
I'm
ghoulish
sorry. Were
undertone.
they seriously singing those lines cheery? Farewell England, farewell forevermore. Like that just makes it come across like you hate England at best. At worst, it sounds like, oh boy, I'm gonna get shot in the head at war. See ya, England.
Cholera, camp fevers, and diarrhea swept through the ranks, infecting nearly every soldier.
Yeah.
And men who died were buried in shallow graves, their stiffening hands emerging from the dirt after a hard
Ew.
rain, like a garden of
Like that's nice. Like how well did they keep it hidden that the main reason people die at war was disease? Because like, if I knew that, I was not going to be signing up for war,
fingers,
and these guys were
beckoning their
signing up
comrades
for
to
it.
join them. Disease killed 10,000 men before they even loaded their rifles. And it was around this point that the British started to notice something. Their commanders didn't seem, what's the word? Oh, yeah, good at
Competent.
this. The British army hadn't fought against a modernized opponent
Okay, now I'm starting to see the links between this and World War One a little more.
since Waterloo. And since officers could purchase promotions, rank
Oh,
often
boy.
reflected wealth and status rather than ability. Lord Cardigan, commander of the British Light Brigade, was a classic specimen.
See, this is like that classic thing. I feel like every time they do like a history of this great military general, like the biggest and most important thing they did was just, well, time to gut our officers and start promoting up via meritocracy. Like that's the main thing they did. Like freaking freaking Frederick the Great takes over. He's like, whoa, we need to actually have good generals here. And like a hundred, maybe not even years later, suddenly, freaking. I can't ever remember his name. The hunt for the Iron Chancellor's name was. This is very deeply embarrassing because he's one of my favorite historical figures, and he's the guy I always play in Civilization 4, and you know who I'm all talking about. Always had a plan. Ugh. Wouldn't matter, because even if I can remember him, I'm probably mostly referring to his general, whose name I should really remember, and I never can. And that's the guy. He's just like, oh wow, like it was barely 100 years ago that Frederick the Great had to come in here and replace all you guys with meritocrat. I have to do that all over again now.
Having bought his way up to Major General, he refused to live in camp, instead sleeping aboard his private yacht. You know, as all great military men do. So the result was a class of military officers who were more gentlemen than professionals. Plus, no one knew where anything was in the British camp at Varna. Logistics were snarled, and medical care, when it existed at all, was incredibly basic. The commissariat, tasked with providing supplies and pay, was part of the Treasury Department and was more focused on its budget rather than the troops. The overall British commander, Lord Raglan, moved around so much that no one ever knew where to find him. Now, Raglan had been a hero of the Napoleonic Wars and lost an arm at Waterloo, but was also old and set in his ways. In fact, he was known for pointing at the Russian lines and falling into old habits, referring to the enemy as the French.
Getting Dragon Age Origins flashbacks there. Logan, you're a wonderful general. You can help us fight the Darkspawn? Well, and to which Logan's like, what's that? The Orlais were fighting... No, the Darkspawn. They're the enemy. The enemy, yes, the enemies are the Orlesians. No, they're the Darkspawn. The Darkspawn are Orlesians? I don't know about that.
Ironically, British troops soon realized that their French allies were better organized and led. Having imbibed many lessons from the Revolution, French officers were professionally promoted due to ability, and they had a tight hand on logistics, transport, and military medicine. Many French, particularly the famous Zouaves, Frenchmen recruited from Algeria, also had campaign experience. Their general, Saint Arnaud, was a ruthless officer, known for commanding the Foreign Legion in Algeria, where he became infamous for his massacres. Killing
that's the famous French Foreign Legion for you.
500 Arab tribesmen by stealing them in a cave. He was, however, at this point, deeply ill with stomach cancer. But
well, you had that coming.
What flag they fought under, or what experience they had, every soldier had been waiting for the day of battle. A moment that would make all of their weeks of disease and suffering worthwhile, and cover them in...
I want to see the uniforms there again. That's some good artwork, and there was a saying which seemed very truthful in one of the Bartimaeus books, where Bartimaeus claims that you can judge the how good an army is by how bad their uniform was. Like they're directly disproportionate to each other, and based on that, I don't know here, because like if these were the best guys, that's obviously the best jacket.
Every soldier had been waiting for the day of battle, a moment that would make all of their weeks of disease and suffering worthwhile, and cover them in glory. Yet when that day arrived, it was a mess. September 20th, 1854, River Alma. Nothing, it seems, is going like it's supposed to.
Yeah. If this is your first time seeing me, you know these are all raw and unedited.
Life's too short not to try
nice outfits.
New.
Very nice choices.
The plan was for the British to make a frontal attack at first light, while the French Zouaves scaled the bluffs to take the higher ground behind the Russian artillery. But the British weren't ready on time, and for hours, the infuriated French had to delay. Finally, the British infantry line advances up the heights and across the river. At first, the cannonballs are coming from far enough that the troops can just step aside as they bounce through the ranks, but the closer they get, the more the artillery rips into them. Then suddenly, a village...
You could do some good level design on a video game like that. You have the idea of like, oh, well, now it's easy, but it's getting harder and harder as we're getting closer. There's some good mind games with that. I like that.
Detonates. Russian engineers had stuffed it with straw and gunpowder, and now the British line breaks into two parts, losing cohesion. Yet things are not going well for Prince Menshikov either. He'd been so sure of victory, again that he could hold these heights for 3 weeks, that he'd actually invited the best families of Sevastopol to picnic and watch the battle. But he hadn't counted on the new mini rifles the British have adopted, giving them a range and accuracy advantage over the Russians' smoothbore muskets.
There's a historical thing there, because I know historically, like 1700s and so, people had picnics on the edge of war zones all the time and were safe. You know, before they had these
His
rifles.
gunners are hurting the British, but they're also dying as they do so and are nearly overrun. Civilian onlookers then abandon their picnic blankets and flee the battlefield
think?
in fine coaches. Oh boy, okay, to lose his artillery pieces would be a disgrace. You know, as well as tactically unsound. They will be needed at Sevastopol, so he orders his cannons dragged away from their positions and tells the infantry to take their place. The advancing Russian infantry crashes into the British, cresting the slope, sending the mauled units into a backwards retreat.
I hope they weren't trying to make the
that runs into
Scottish
and
sing that
disorders
song
the
about not
units
seeing
coming up
England
from
again.
behind to reinforce.
Although I have to assume if the Scottish were singing the song about not seeing England again, they wouldn't sound all that. Like, they'd sound genuinely happy about that, I gotta assume, you know?
Men are dying, screaming, as an abandoned parasol rolls across the battlefield in a breeze. Then
that's
from
so
behind,
pretty.
Menshikov hears the crack of rifles. More men fall. The French have seized the hills behind them, and more British are in range. It's over. The line he'd swore would hold for 3 weeks has fallen within hours. He orders a pullback to Sevastopol, but most of his men are already running. Through a spyglass, Lord Raglan sees his Russian enemies begin to retreat. Yeah, he's actually behind them, having made the bizarre decision to ride past British lines into Russian ones to better observe the fighting. Had they pursued, Menchikov's army might have been destroyed and Sevastopol taken within days. But ironically, Raglan's insistence on speed
I mean, it
had
worked, I
actually
guess. He
slowed
was-
the
he's
army down.
alive.
They had no carts to ferry wounded back to the landing site, or cavalry to pursue, and the Allies had taken over 4,000 casualties and really needed to recover. Meanwhile, scouts reported back that Sevastopol was
Incidentally, keep track of the numbers there. That was 10,000 to disease. 10,000 to disease. I can see my picture. 4,000 to combat.
essentially open for the taking. The whole point of this expedition, the destruction of Russia's naval base on the Black Sea, could be achieved in one fell swoop. But Raglan, along with his commanders, had a better idea. If there was to be a siege, it should be a traditional one, you know, with heavy guns and a staging ground close by. Yeah, they would march around Sevastopol and take the port of Balaclava. Then, when they had sufficient artillery and supplies, they'd besiege it from the south. This move puzzled many, including a journalist from the Times of London, William Howard Russell, one of the...
Okay, so to be clear here, I need to hear that again just to make sure I heard everything right. Now, what I believe I heard was that it would be very simple for them to just take Sevastopol, but the generals were like, that wouldn't be gloriful enough or something like that. We're like, we have to do it the old-fashioned way, which just sounds so horribly like that D&D campaign. I feel like I've had that moment where I'm the dungeon master going, okay, and your NPC points out, you could easily kind of just walk into and take the city, and the PCs are like, well, we can't just walk in and take the city. We have to do all these extra steps that will kill us.
casualties and really needed to recover.
Right, so let's pay
Meanwhile,
attention here.
Scouts reported back that Sevastopol was essentially open for the taking. The whole
Open for a taking, according to the scouts.
point of this expedition, the
This was the whole point.
destruction of Russia's naval base on the Black Sea, could be achieved in one fell swoop. But Raglan,
One fell swoop.
along with his commanders, had a better idea. If there was to be a siege, it should be a traditional one, you know, with heavy guns
Okay, so they were told it'd be easy, and they're like, we don't want it to be easy.
and a staging ground close by. Yeah, they would march around Sevastopol and take the port of Balaclava. Then, when they had sufficient artillery
Okay, so, to be clear here, they're going to siege another city in order to siege the city that they could easily be sieging already.
and supplies, they'd besiege it from the south. This move puzzled many, including a journalist from the Times of London, William Howard Russell.
See, it doesn't puzzle me, but it only doesn't puzzle me because I've been a dungeon master so many times, and I've seen this kind of thinking many times.
One of the first war correspondents, he was simultaneously awed by the bravery of the fighting men and disgusted by the deplorable conditions, extreme violence, and what he saw as the incompetence of Raglan and the aristocratic officer class. His accounts, carried by ship, would increasingly begin to shape.
We can already see Raglan there being played by Stephen Fry, while some Blackadder types are over in the tents.
Public opinion of the war. Meanwhile, in Sevastopol, civilians were panicking in anticipation of an Allied force that would surely storm the city. Yet, as we already know, a force that never came. Instead, Prince Menshikov arrived with the remnants of his army to meet with the leaders of the Black Sea Fleet.
The journey to becoming a
That's gotta be
University of Phoenix student
weird,
is
kind of
easier than you might
stressful.
think. There's no application.
It's gotta be weird, kind of stressful
All
for
depended on
the
Sevastopol
civilians, you know.
now, and the admirals had a brilliant, if unpalatable, plan. They took Russia's proud Black Sea Fleet, the victors of Sinop, and sunk it. They strategically scuttled the vessels around Sevastopol to create a
Okay.
blocking reef of shipwrecks to prevent naval attack. The crews and all guns,
Interesting.
however, would come ashore and form the core of the city's garrison in the upcoming siege. Menshikov would keep his army in the field, securing the supply lines to transport food and reinforcements into the city, while also looking for an opportunity to strike. And among
Sounds
those
very
reinforcements
clever.
would be the aristocrat artilleryman Leo Tolstoy, whose dispatches home
Oh, right,
would
him.
define Russian views of the conflict as much as Russell's journalism shaped the British. And
Good for
after
them.
Alma, that's where things stood. The Allies establishing a base at their new port, waiting for heavy guns, giving the Russian Navy weeks to fortify Sevastopol against attack. But things would not be stagnant for long. For 1 month after Alma, Menshikov finally marched.
Okay, I've had things like that in Crusader Kings 4. That moment where you need to decide, do I try and strike now with what limited I have while they're weak, or do I take the gamble that I can resupply and strengthen faster and more effectively than they can? I don't have a good answer for you because it's going to change from circumstances to circumstances. But here's a good rule of thumb. If you are in their lands, they can reinforce and resupply better than you can.
For the Allies' new port in a battle that would become renowned for brave stands and suicidal charges. The Battle of Balaclava and the Charge of the Light Brigade. And listen,
Oh, yeah, actually, I have heard that before. Charge of the Light Brigade. No idea what it referred to. I probably assumed it was a thing at Disneyland.
if we're going to ride headlong into this infamous military foobar, I am going to need way more caffeine.
Okay, and it's just a commercial from here on out. So that was that thing. I feel like I got up to date, or was able to pretend I was up to date pretty quickly. Transition. So yeah, that was that. Good sample of what it looks like in World War II, but before that, France and England being probably the stronger side, but they're being dumb about it. So another side being smarter on their home turf is able to be better. And somehow I doubt the Americans are going to show up in the Crimean War to bail people out. And just kind of by not being tired yet and but patting themselves on the back like they did something beyond that. So I don't really know how this is going to end, and it's going to be interesting to see what the heck the Charge of the Light Brigade is, because I got a feeling it isn't Disneyland parade nor a Will-O-Wisp brothel making fun of the Disneyland parade, which is what comes to mind when I hear Charge of the Light Brigade. So, go ahead, if you enjoyed that, leave a comment about something, and subscribe.